I'm Hans Hedberg. I'm a heritage manager within our global team.
And I'm Bill Krzastek, car collector, enthusiast, and being reunited with the former Roger Moore ST1. And we're here for the latest episode of What Drives You? My father and I used to watch episodes of The Saint with Roger Moore as a child. And the car that just flashed across the screen every week was just superb. As a young child, I hadn't seen anything quite like that before, and it was a Volvo 1800. So years later, decades later, in fact, I wondered whatever became of the cars that were used in the television series The Saint. And that's what started my search for this, and it ended up with this particular car. And that's what most folks, when they saw the Saint on TV, they said, "That's a Volvo?" Yeah. And also they were quite surprised. And its styling today still is timeless. When people look at the car, they go, "Wow, that's a nice looking automobile."
And still is, actually, because we bring this car to our design studio. And still is one of the, it's very crunchy, and when you have newcomers in the company, they are, they're astonished. Is this a Volvo?
The car stands as kind of an outlier as opposed to the normal Volvo, and that's what actually makes it rather unique. You have the indestructibleness of a Volvo, the integrity of a Volvo, yet you have an Italian and American style vehicle itself.
But actually, if you see some of the new cars, you see some of these, elegant lines that are still, they were picked up again after like 10 years ago. So we're using them, that's for sure. The balance and the harmony.
Even the first Polestar. They used it,
which was actually a concept car.
Yes.
From Volvo at that time. Yeah.
And you can see the design elements that they borrowed from and incorporated into that style as well.
Yeah. It was, and that time we had Thomas Ingelat, who now is CEO of the Polestar. So he was extremely fond of the P1800 lines.
The show itself was very well done. It was on for a number of years. It was shown in America for approximately 7 years, which is a rather lengthy time frame those days and even today. And being able to see this vehicle every week or virtually every week in your screens was just fantastic. I used to watch the show in secret because it was on very late at night in its early days in the early 60s.
Because of the action?
Because,
or what?
Because it was not picked up by the regular Americans. They said, no, it's too boring. And so they ran it late night. And in late night, the ratings took off to the point where the head executives of the NBC network said, this show is taking care of all the competition. We are number one every time we run this. So they actually asked if they would come back and film new episodes of The Saint in color, and that's when this particular car appeared. And it's really become one of the earliest instances of product placement.
Have you had any kind of experience of renovating cars?
Oh yes,
that before.
I've been a car enthusiast since I was little, and all. And I've had a number of cars. I've got an Austin Healey Sprite I've had since '74, but I've known since '65, and a variety of different cars. And I had restored a couple of cars, or had them restored along the way. So I was somewhat familiar. So I also knew that once you start a restoration, it's going to cost you much more than what you initially estimated there. So I kind of knew what I was getting into. Good. And I was very fortunate to have come across Irv Gordon. Irv Gordon, the famous 3 million mile Volvo 1800 specialist, who actually put me in touch with a restorer in England. He says, "Bill, why don't you have my restorer friend look at the car and give his assessment?" And it was based upon his ability and his estimate, what he thought he could restore the car and make it roadable again, that kind of helped seal the deal. So we're indebted to Irv Gordon as well.
I think the car is a really typical time machine. You can look at on the print or on the screen. If you can look at like an artifact, like this is sculpture, something is start to talk to you, and then if you're allowed to buy the car or you just have a test drive, then all the memories come back to you. Talk about your grandfather or father, and I think that is one of the main issue. Of course, now the brand is going northeast, with our premium of Volvos, which makes also the value of old Volvos. We are now up on what you paying for the German car actually. So I hope you did the right investment. So I hope we get the money back.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I honestly did not purchase it as an investment. My main purpose was to bring the car out from being in a warehouse into the public eye and bring it back in front of everyone so they could see it. And I can't tell you how much I underestimated the folks out there who were interested in this car. It was just amazing. The people that have contacted me.
I also seen the pictures of the condition of cars. Did you know that when you bought it? How it was not a wreck, but it was really...
Yeah, it had been glossed over quite a bit. We would call it in America Bondo and all, but it was a bit of a sculpture and all to look like it was an 1800 and all. But as we got into it, oh my, and it was it needed quite a bit more than what we expected. But we did it properly with all new old stock Volvo panels that we searched. We went through the globe, parts from Canada, parts from America, parts from Sweden, Australia, to get parts so we could have the original Volvo-made parts back on the car as it was before the cameras.
How was the trim of the interior at that time?
The interior was actually in good shape except for some of the armrests, the heavy wear areas. But those seats are the same seats that Roger Moore sat in. I had to have them restitched twice with the stitching that stretches. So when you sit, because as the leather shrinks, you have to have some give. But the carpeting, the headrest, the seats, the dash, everything's exactly as Roger Moore, had it in its day. It's the original materials, including the burn and the dashboard above the ashtray. That was done by Roger Moore and all. As I was told by the second owner of the car, Martin Benson, told me, he says, "That's Roger's. It was there when I got it." So yeah, so when you sit in it, you can feel like you're, just like Roger.
This car is talking for itself, actually. I mean, and thanks to you, actually, to have people like you, Bill, taking care of, digging in the mud and get it into real, actually, that we can use then, because it is a talking piece for us, actually. This is, for me, that's good to know, because I'm also a former car journalist. I love to spread the word, actually, and I always been knowing about this. I'm a bit too young, because I think they started to send it 69.
Oh well, the series started in 1962.
Yeah, but they stopped sending 69. So.
Yeah, 69 they stopped the last episodes.
But in Scandinavia we had one broadcast, one channel. And when they had this on prime time Saturdays, it was everywhere. Yeah, and decades after that, it was the most world famous Volvo in Sweden. So for us, it was. I must say, as a Gothenburg and as a Swede, as a Volvo fan, I'm really glad that you did this job for us and for the world.
Well, thank you. You mentioned, collectibles and et cetera. I did not do this to say, oh, I own this. I wanted it out for the world to see and to remember, and with the same memories that I had. And that was one reason why I had the car. I loaned it to several museums. It was on display on the West Coast, on the East Coast. Volvo borrowed the car multiple times, because the more people that see it and the eyeballs, that's what I wanted to have happen. Sitting in my garage doesn't do that. And I was just a caretaker, as you say, preserving it for the next generation. And I felt that when it came time for me to sell the vehicle, as far as I had multiple offers from, folks around the world. But I said, Volvo really was where this car needed to be and be cared for, and for folks to take care. And that's how it ended up here. I had several different offers of the car, having had it for 12 years. Matter of fact, I was the longest owner, of this particular car. Roger Moore himself only had it for 2 years, and the third owner had it for like 11. So we were really the longest owner. And during that time period, folks say, well, if you ever want to sell it, and we'd take it to events like the Hilton Head Concourse, which Volvo became a sponsor of. And some folks would walk up, this car's not leaving the island, because they said, how much? Just no money. And it's like, you're not the right caretaker for this car there. And the same thing happened with various folks that offered me. We were offered from one of the big-time international auctions to highlight their auction in London. They wanted to use this as the premier car. And it's like, I spent so much time, effort, love, in putting this together, and not just that, but all the stories behind the car and all the owners, which I was fortunate enough to speak to, 4 of which are now passed on. I was like, I want this to be somebody who really cares and is going to keep this vehicle. And so money, although it was a negotiating point with Volvo, just like anybody else, as you mentioned, when I purchased it, the same thing. We were the same way, except I was here and they were there. And so we reached the place where I felt comfortable, but mainly knowing that it was going to the proper home and where it should be. And that was what we ended up. So I'm happy, they're happy, and I've been invited back.
Yeah, that's good.
The engine was missing. The original engine was missing. It had an engine. It had an 1800 engine, but it wasn't its engine itself that the car was born with. And I found by contacting the third owner that he had purchased a parts car in like 1975 to use as for spares. And that car had a rebuilt short block there. And his son, who ran a mechanic shop, said, "Dad, why don't we just swap it out? It's been rebuilt." So his dad said, "Okay." So they swapped it out. And they put the original engine block from this in the trunk or boot of the 63 1800. Well, it's like, oh, great. Well, who eventually this gentleman found a bill of sale that he had written out to the seller. That he sold, I sell to one Mr. So-and-so, this car for £100.
Yeah.
And so it took me years, and I finally tracked down this gentleman's name and found him. Turned out that he was the right guy. He had gotten the car, he restored it for his girlfriend at the time, and she drove it to Spain. And she was a fan of Roger Moore and the Saint. And I said, "Well, believe it or not, you had the engine." And then now he had restored and put it in the car. She was driving it. And anyway, she ended up in Spain and eventually moved back to England, sold the car, and through years, and this took me quite a number of years, and going through 4 more where the engine went from here to here, we were able to find that car, but the engine, when we found the car, the engine had been replaced again.
Nice. Tomb Raider.
And so we ended up with that owner said, "Yeah, I sold the engines with 2 other parts and other stuff to somebody else." I contacted that person. "Oh, yeah,
Wow.
yeah, I'm the guy. I said, "Well, where is he?" He goes, "Oh, I sold that again." So I kept tracking, and we eventually ended up finding the gentleman who bought 2 engines and some transmissions, and they were under a tarpaulin near a creek sitting outside in England. And I asked him actually it turned out to be his lady friend, if she would take pictures of the serial number, and which she did, and sure enough, that was the engine. So the engine was out of this car for 40 years. And also that was probably the most
cool
difficult and impossible. And there's articles written up about the whole trek, and I'm giving you the short version. Yeah. So we ended up, with that as well.
So matching number after 40 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly. And all. But the engine that was rebuilt, that was in that car from the other vehicle, was rebuilt so well in England. They spent a lot of time, effort, and timing, everything. Most people who drove it said, "This is the smoothest running Volvo that I've ever had." So it was excellent. And so anyways, that was one of the most difficult, followed by probably the fan, trying to find out of all the fans that may be available, which one was used in the back of this vehicle as well. So that was another
because I
story.
have an extra fan, isn't it?
It's got in the back on the pillar, the little white one.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that was another one. So, and I guess the third thing was restoring the original mini lights, and that was another story in itself. It started really about 2012 when we were contacted by Volvo. Had been borrowing my car, I should mention, every now and then, and they said, "Hey, we'd like to take it here, we'd like to take it there," and I was like, "Hey, more eyeballs, the better." And so that happened. Well, in 2012, Paul Walder, who worked at that time for Volvo UK, I'm not sure if he's still with the company or not, said, hey, can we possibly borrow your car because they may be doing some filming on the West Coast, but he was very quiet about it. I said, you've always, I said, no problem. Just let me know when, whatever. And it turned out that they were filming a possible reboot of the Saint to be a television series. And Roger Moore was also involved in this as a producer and a small bit part in it as well. So we went ahead and I said, sure, go ahead. So they shipped the car over for the production. Well, and they did the filming of it. Well, while the car was on the West Coast, if the case the series took off, they may want to use the car again. And it was using the flashback sequences. So there's a possibility. I said, well, rather than back and forth, it'd be nice to have the car on the West Coast just in case. And also we arranged with the Peterson Museum, whom you'll be visiting I'm sure soon, to put it on display. And they said, yes, we would love to have this car, and because we know about it and it fits into our museum and what we stand for. So we had the car put on display, which normally is a 6-month period. And I said, well, that's great. Well, the car was there almost a year and a half because it was so popular. They said, can we keep it longer? And I said, hey, more people that see it, that's what makes me happy. So we had the car out there. Finally, the museum was being renovated, and they needed to remove all the exhibits that did not belong to them because they were afraid of damage, etc. So they were moving it back. And a friend of mine said, Bill, you know this guy, you know this guy, you know this guy. Why don't you see if you can get it on Jay Leno's garage? And I said, well, I hadn't thought about it, but I guess let me find out. And sure enough, the museum, the Peterson Museum fellow knew this guy, and this person knew this person. They contacted them. We get a call, and they said, hey, you really own this car? And they, of course, wanted documentation that is real. And so we did all of that. And they said, sure, we'll schedule you. So fine. And then it went dead, as a lot of things do, and as we know. And then a couple months later, we got a call saying, hey, can you be ready for such and such? So we ended up putting it out there and did the Jay Leno event on which ran a nice little, it's still on YouTube today on Jay Leno's Garage, and it was super, and it was well picked up, and the Volvo dealers all picked up on it, and all of a sudden the hits kept happening, and I don't know how many it has now. Last I looked, it was over 1 million hits, and at that point it was super, and so everybody was very happy. It was pleased, and that kind of, I guess, groundswell. And at the same time, magazine articles came out with the refilming of the possible Saint, and so that came out in Octane magazine, as well as Volvo themselves covered it in Volvo Professional and other Volvo mix, so they all covered it as well. So pretty much it was out there as far as peaking, as far as popularity at that point.
What drives me is actually what you are doing a little bit, to talk about the stories, what makes all these dead things around us alive, actually, because they are, like what I said, it's like they are time machines, and they're helping us to remember things that were a long way forgotten, actually. So it's really crispy when you have especially young people or younger people, because for them it's forgotten. So you can take a car that's only 30 years, and for them it's a reminder of their childhood and all that stuff. And especially cars, I think, were into a time period for a moment that were like losing a bit of the history. We're really into, of course, the electrification, all that stuff, but we have to bear in mind that we have been doing these cars on these islands, the 5th biggest island in Sweden, Hisingen, for almost 100 years. And we should be proud about that, and we should be aware about that.
Me is I always see automobiles as an art form. Some people are attracted to paintings. I think each car has its own art form, and the stylist, the design, what goes into it. And to me, the first step is the car appeal to me? Does it appeal as an art form? And of course, the Volvo does, and other cars I've had as well. And secondly, how do they perform? How well do they? And once again, the Volvo Volvo and other cars I've had have performed well. I've restored a few cars that I've done, and after I drove them, I said, I don't really like this car. I don't really like the driving. It looks nice, but it's terrible, and also as a vehicle itself. So that's the second thing that drives me as well. And then depending upon whether I keep them or not, and what I keep in my garage is representative of cars that not only do I like the art and the design, but I also like the driving of it as well. And if it has personal connotations, whether it was my first car or somebody else's, or has the history of the 1800 as it does, and the romance that goes with it as well, that definitely is the crowning achievement. That's sort of the trifecta of all, of the three itself. And the 1800 definitely fits that category. It's still a beautiful design today.